I encourage people, don't ask me yes or no questions. Really don't. Because if you say, is my business going to be successful? And I say, nope, where do you go? Besides, that is when the Madam Hoo-Has and the Swami Swalandas will go, no, you have a family curse. How many in your family? Four, you have dog. And they'll convince you to burn 400 specially blessed candles at the Roman Catholic Church. No. The first thing I remind people of is, look, I'm human, and even the best of us are only 85% accurate. The only one 100% accurate is God, and he doesn't have a booth at the Psychic Fair this week.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Shifting Dimensions podcast, where we explore the unseen, the unknown, and the transformative moments that shift our understanding of reality. I'm your host, Jumi Moses, spiritual and metaphysical investigator, exploring the mysteries of existence. I have the pleasure of speaking with Corby Mitleid today. Corby has been doing psychic readings since 1973. Corby certifications and affiliations include Certified Tarot Master and Certified Professional Tarot Reader. And she's also the member of the American Tarot Association and the Tarot Guild. She's the author of 3 books, Clean Out Your Life Closet, The Psychic Yellow Brick Road, and You've Got the Magic, Who Needs a Genie? Corby, welcome to Shifting Dimensions. It's such a pleasure to have you on the show.
It's great to be here.
So I'm very excited about this conversation because I want to dive into all things tarot. We were talking right before the show started, and I was telling you that I had a guest on the show who had very strong opinions about tarot. So I want to pick your brain about some of those opinions a little bit later in the show. But to start
Okay.
off first, I do want to talk about, what is tarot? I don't want to take for granted that everybody listening to this knows what it is. What is tarot, and how did you get into it?
Okay. How I got into it is the 30-second elevator speech. So we'll start with that. When I was 9, I read a book called The Witch Family by Eleanor Estes, and I thought, ooh, there's magic in the world. I want to go find it. Fast forward to 1973 when I was a senior in high school, working part-time at Spencer Gifts. And they had the James Bond 007 tarot deck because that's when Live and Let Die came out. So I bought it. I mean, we were all hippies then. You had your elephant bell bottoms and your fringed jacket like David Crosby and your deck. Tarot is the deck you're going to see in all the B movies and the snuff. It's the deck everybody knows. It's been around for centuries. It has rules in that a tarot deck always must have 78 cards, 22 majors, 4 suits. Each of the suits has 14 cards. Now, this deck is where the modern deck comes from. In tarot, you've got king, queen, prince, or knight, and page. The knight and the page became the jack. So those are your 3 royal cards. And tarot has 4 suits: rods, cups, swords, pentacles. In a modern deck, rods or our wands are clubs, cups are hearts, swords are spades, and pentacles are diamonds. So that's one of the reasons why gypsies can tell fortunes with a modern deck, because they know what the matchup is with a standard tarot deck. So I encourage people, though, yeah, you got to learn your basics, but they're doorways, and they will give you information that the card doesn't really say. And you have to be okay with that. Typical. There's one card, 3 of Pentacles, and it shows a guy with stained glass windows in a church, and he's working on them. And the meaning is mastery and a long-term event, blah, blah, blah. But I was reading for a couple up in Kitchener, Ontario, and I looked at the card, and what came out of my mouth was, there's a deconsecrated or abandoned church about 2 miles from here, and you need to open up a cafe bakery. I thought that it was left field in Space Cadet, but they looked at each other and nodded, and they looked at me and said, yeah, we know which one. We've been arguing for 2 years. Now, that's an example of where tarot says, I know that this has this meaning, but we want to take you off to a side road. And the longer you read tarot, the more you will trust that. It is why Tarot Master, I don't just read what's in a book. I've learned the allegory in the card, and I let it give me a very personal message for the people I'm working with. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, it does make sense to me. So just to make sure I can sum up everything that you're saying, so
Yes.
basically, you got interested in the magic of tarot when you were in high school, and you've been on that
Yep.
journey ever since. And you just
Hmm.
broke down how the cards are kind of created, how they're set up, and what type of cards you need for it to be considered a tarot deck, essentially. What is the purpose of tarot, though, right? Because you just kind of hinted at the fact that you can look at a card and you can even get additional meanings or insight that aren't necessarily readily available from that card. So is was tarot created to predict the future? Was it created to give people guidance? Why was it created?
It was created for all of that. They are, if you will, magical doorways, like a crystal ball, like any one of my oracle decks. Same thing. But tarot has been around the longest. Oracle decks are pretty much a 20th century invention over the last 30, 40 years. That's a whole nother story. But the thing about tarot that I love is when I use it, people understand pictures. I can pontificate to them and say, well, you should do this and you should do that. And they're not necessarily going to listen. For instance, let's take the Fool card. The Fool card naturally has a guy holding a rose with a hobo bag and a dog, and he's walking off the cliff. What's the allegory? If you grab hold of what you're passionate about, that's the rose, carry very little emotional baggage, that's the hobo stick, and only tell those who are loyal what you're going to do, that's the dog, you can cross mountains and fly. The Fool card is not the stupid person, it's the exuberant rookie. Now, there is no book that explains the Fool card the way I do, but it sears that picture, that positive picture in somebody's mind. And then they will remember the card and what I say about it. Now, let's take one of the cards everybody is terrified of. Dun, dun, the Tower card. Doom, gloom, and destruction, right? Well, I explain it differently. I say, I want you to think about it like the imploding sports stadium. Okay? Red Sox want to build a new stadium. They got to blow up Fenway first and clear the ground. So that's what this card is telling you. Things are going to get blown up. The ground is cleared, but you can rebuild. That way they don't panic, but they understand things are going to change big time, but they still have power. And of course, everyone thinks the devil card is your cursed, blah, blah, blah. And I say, no, it is not necessarily Mr. Horns in a tail. And I joke and I say it's probably not even Jack Nicholson in The Witch of the Beastwick. What it is constantly bedeviled by something, someone, or some situation, or holding yourself back from your highest and best. And then we go into the details. The key is people are scared of tarot cards because of the bad B movies and thinking that the card is always literal. It's not. And the longer you read, the more you understand the card's nuance and you can explain it to the people you read. I mean, I read 1,000 people a year and have for 20 years now. There's nothing I haven't seen, but I do know how people react to the cards. If you can let them peek behind the door a little bit, then they can take in the message much more carefully and make it work in a positive way.
You are right. I think a lot of people are scared of tarot cards, but there are a lot of people who aren't scared of tarot cards, right? When you go
Mm-hmm.
on TikTok, for example, there's so many people doing collective readings, and so there's so many tarot readers out there today.
I
What are your
know.
thoughts on that? Can anybody just get into tarot, or is it something that has to
Mm-hmm.
be very intentional? Do you have to seek out someone who is very experienced in it, like yourself,
No,
to really be taught how to
no.
use the decks?
TikTok's a funny beast. Yes, there are thousands and thousands of readers on there. And I avoided it for years because I didn't want to be just one of those. But I've kind of rebranded myself as the no bullshit psychic. And people love that. They figure that what I want to talk to. She's really straight. But the thing that I tell people that, again, I don't hear a lot of other psychics say is, I'm not special. You can do what I do. We're all wired like the same house plan. The other example is we all have 10 fingers. All of us can pick out chopsticks. If you really love the idea of playing the piano, you study music and you practice and you get really good. And 1 in 10 million is Elton John. I can't promise you you're going to be the Elton John of the major arcana, but if you play with the cards and love them, they will love you back. They will. And you will get the real stories from them. I usually start people with oracle decks because they're easier. There are not so many rules. You're not so worried about making mistakes. And once you realize your intuition is just as good as mine, mine's just got more time at the gym, then you can move, if you want, from oracle to tarot. And it's going to be an easier learn because you're already familiar with the idea of what certain animals mean, what certain colors mean, things like that.
So when you're, working with the cards and you're giving
Mhm.
someone a reading, what energies are you working with? Are you just tapping into your intuition? Are you interacting with a being on the other side that's relaying information to you? What's really going on a spiritual,
I'm sure that
metaphysical level?
their guides are going, psst, psst, tell them this. When you sit down with me, the first thing I'm going to say to you is, what's the most important thing you want to get out of here knowing? And if you go blank on me, I'll go Brooklyn on you and go, darling, what's biting your butt? Because everybody's got one of those. The whole thing is, I do a lot more than tarot. Tarot is your everyday tour bus. House, car, job, kids, finances. Okay, God, you put me here. Now what? But I'm also a past life specialist. I channel spirit guides and angels. And yes, I'm a medium. I talk to dead people, but I'm not dial-a-dead. So I will not automatically grab the cards unless you say, the everyday tour bus, I need information on my kids, my job, whatever. It is one tool. But just like a doctor doesn't always use an x ray, sometimes he uses a scalpel or a syringe. I don't always use tarot. Sometimes it's a direct download. Sometimes it is. But the other thing I encourage people, don't ask me yes or no questions. Really don't. Because if you say, is my business going to be successful? And I say, nope, where do you go? Besides, that is when the Madam Hoo-Has and the Swami Swalandas will go, no, you have a family curse. How many in your family? 4, you have dog. And they'll convince you to burn 400 specially blessed candles at the Roman Catholic Church. No. I teach my people, always ask how. Here's an example. If you were opening up your own broadcasting studio and you said, how do I make it work? I'd fan the cards and then I'd put a card for you, a card for the energy around the business, the brick and mortar location, how to market it, clients, competition, staff, finances, what you need to know, and best possible outcome. I do deep dish readings because that gives you all the information you need to put a rocket pack on your back. On TikTok, I just did a video on how to instantly design a spread. Let's say you were choosing between two houses. You've got a movie up, two houses. What kind of a spread? Well, what would you ask the realtor? What's the condition of the cellar, first floor, second floor, roof? How's the neighborhood? And you pull cards on that for each of the two houses and you do a compare and contrast. It's not that hard if you trust yourself. That's the hardest thing for new people to do is trust themselves with the cards.
So, with these cards, I heard somebody kind of describe it this way that when they're doing readings, they're not necessarily trying to predict the future or tell somebody what they're supposed to do because the future is a moving target. But what they're doing is picking up the energy of the current situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whatever they're trying to find information on. And what they're doing is relaying the energy and information that they're picking up in the present moment, but they're more serving as guides, not future tellers like, hey, do this, do that. Do you agree with that? Is that how you work as well? Or are
2
you
million percent.
okay?
Let's use your first 95% is, does Bruce love me? I mean, it's always romance questions. So I'll do a 5 card spread. You, Bruce, the relationship, what you need to know, and best possible outcome. If you still go, I don't know what to do, then I pull my 3 3s. First 3 cards are status quo. You just stick with, you kind of bumble along. Second 3 cards are the come to Jesus meeting. You do serious counseling. You draw a line in the sand. Third 3 is hasta la bye bye. It's been nice. I'm out of here. But even if leave is going Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice, Beetlejuice in the neon sign, free will says, I have to zip it. It's up to her. She's got her options. And if she says, I guess I'll stick it out, that's where it is. The only times that I don't shut up is if she tells me she's been abused, gaslit, he's a narcissist, she's scared. Then the reader's turban comes off, my reverend collar goes on, and it happened to me this afternoon. While I had her on Zoom, I looked up a battered women's shelter in her town, told her how to work with it, gave her what I know about the safest way to leave and start the divorce. Because that is my responsibility as a reverend, which trumps the tarot reader. That's just my own personal stuff.
Yeah.
But the rest of it, no, it's free will. And I'm going to tell you what I see, whether or not you like it. And you're going to have to stop me if you want, Jimmy, because I have so many of these stories. Somebody I read up in Canada, and I saw some tough stuff. She looks at me, she says, you suck, and she walks away. Okay. 3 months later, I'm back in Canada. Who's the first person to sit down in my chair? She says, last time I said you sucked. I said, yes, I remember. Because you told me that I was going to take in a boarder and then I was going to sell my house. And I thought that was all bull. But my granddaughter moved home and she's pregnant. And now I'm going to sell the house to help raise her kid. And I still don't like you, but I want to know what else you see. Don't shoot the messenger. I can only tell you what's on the card. What you do with it is up to you. I didn't tell her she had to do these things, but I apparently saw what was going to happen. That's all.
So that's interesting, right? Because obviously, again, there's so many people out there who do these readings who aren't necessarily, they don't necessarily have the best intentions for someone. So they could say, oh, I see that you're going to do this. But a part of me thinks sometimes is like, well, whether or not you see that, you've kind of planted it in that person's subconscious. So how do we know is that was how do we know that that was supposed to happen in the future versus you've planted something in their subconscious and now they're making decisions to align with what you predicted for them. Do you understand that question?
I didn't make her granddaughter get pregnant and move in. I did not. And since I'm in New York and she's in Canada, I couldn't force her to sell the house. If she really didn't want to do it, she wouldn't have done it. That's her thing. But it's one of the most important things a tarot reader or any metaphysician has to do is remember, we are here in service. It is not about us. Just like a hammer would not go strutting around on the back deck. Look at that Trex. I just put that in. So no, somebody else held the hammer and whacked its head against the nail. The hammer didn't do it. Someone held the hammer. And with us, someone is holding the tool. We are the megaphone for spirit. That's why I say take my work seriously, me not so much.
Mm. And that's a good point. So, what would you say to the people who are on the other side of the readings, right? The people who are coming to you for readings or coming to anybody for readings, right? Because sometimes, let's say they get some sort of prediction about what's going to happen to them. Can they
Mm-hmm.
change their future? Can they decide to make different
Yes,
decisions or
yes,
choose
yes,
whether or not
yes.
to believe that? And then, on top of
Absolutely.
that, too, how much agency should they have, especially as it pertains to discernment when having a reading?
That's why I wrote this book, The Psychic Yellow Brick Road, How to Find the Real Wizards and Avoid the Flying Monkeys. It is not a book that tells you how to be a psychic, but how to find a reader you can trust, what kind of questions to ask, what you shouldn't, when to run. So your question is brilliant. And the most important thing you must do is get references before you sit with us. You have to be able to trust us on some level, or it's never going to work. Your shields are going to be up so high that I, an honest psychic, will say, I'm really sorry. I just can't read you. Or somebody else is just going to pull what they can and fake it. Okay. So, but that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
We're here in service. And a good metaphysician knows that and doesn't take credit for what they do.
Yeah, and I also heard a lot of times that when, and you kind of alluded to this earlier,
Mhm.
where it's, you're speaking to someone and they're like, oh gosh, you're cursed and we have to do another session and it's all these couple $100 and you have to burn all these candles. And I'm also of the
I
belief
warn
that,
people against that.
yeah, Yeah, that's
No,
a huge
no
red
smoke
flag.
coming out of my ears.
Yes. That's a huge red flag. And I'm also of the belief that if you're going to a psychic, whatever they're telling you should not be a surprise because to your point earlier, we all have psychic and intuitive abilities. Some people are Mozart, in
Hmm.
comparison, in that field, but we all have the ability to tap in and kind of understand and sense the energies that we're working with
Hmm.
in the present moment of our lives. So when you go to someone, most of what they're telling you should seem like, oh, okay, I'm kind of picking that up too. There should be a resonance there. It shouldn't be completely off with whatever they're telling you that you've never thought of for yourself or come in contact with, because I think there's a lot of
No,
synchronicities.
I disagree with you on that. Tell you
Okay.
why. Um, there are some people who have talents that are so buried and they don't believe in themselves. A perfect example is J.M. Fry, who is a brilliant author up in Canada. And her best friend, Steph, was my front person. And so one day I read it, I said, there are books flying out of your hands. She said, oh, I can't write. I said, well, I'm telling you, this is what I'm seeing. And Steph looked over and goes, you know, you've got one you've talked about. Oh, but I could never. I'm saying, yes, you can. Now she's an award winning author. And she says that whenever she doubts herself, she pulls out the cassette, that's how long ago it was, of our reading and replays it to remind herself somebody saw that before she did. So in that case, yeah, now I would never say to her, yes, I see you building wells in Sudan. No, that's not what she does. It's the same thing when someone says, what am I supposed to do with my life? I'm not going to tell you because I haven't lived your life. And then if I say you're supposed to do X and it's something you don't want to do, then you think I'm failing. So the first thing I remind people of is look, I'm human, and even the best of us are only 85% accurate. The only one 100% accurate is God, and He doesn't have a booth at the psychic fair this week. So if you don't, what I'm saying doesn't make sense to you, it's okay. Put it aside. Maybe it will later. See, I
I
don't take offense by that.
Yeah. And I love that what you said that, I think it goes back to the whole point of discernment and really
Mm-hmm.
making sure that after reading, you're thinking about these things for yourself. And no psychic is 100% correct because there's a limit to how much you can see, right? And there's some things that the individual is going to have to discover for themselves. And a true reader will empower you in your life. A true psychic, I
Yes,
would say, would empower you in your life and not set you up in a way where you always feel like you need to come to them for insight and
that's a
stuff like
hook.
that.
That's a hook, and that's as bad as the other kind of hook and baby. So if that's what
Mm,
the psychic tries to do, out the door,
okay.
out the door.
So how do you feel about people considering tarot to be evil? So, for example, I spoke with this woman called Tina Irwin. She's a psychic. She's been in the field for a very long time. She specializes in really getting rid of ghosts and dark entities that are plaguing people. That's her specialty. So she
Okay.
has very strong opinions about divination tools, especially tarot, and she thinks tarot is kind of just as bad as a Ouija board, which, most people say, please do not use that.
No, I'll tell you about the Ouija boards, but it's ink on cards, baby. Why is this any more devilish than Rorschach ink blots to help
Well,
somebody figure out their brain?
yeah, well, she's saying that obviously because it's a divination tool and you're using it to tap into someone's energy or try to figure out what's going on in their life, that a lot of times she's not saying the people who are reading it are evil, but she's saying that a lot of people are not aware of the energy some of these cards hold, right? How, black magicians in the fourth dimension could be influencing that card, influencing a deck of cards or influencing a reader. And I've also heard other tarot readers say that, never take a deck from someone else or don't buy a deck from this specific place. There are these like different rules when it comes to picking the right card and cleansing the energies and stuff like that.
They're not rules, they're opinions. That's the difference. I agree, unless you know and love the person, don't take their cards. I mean, when I stopped traveling because of herniated disc and pinched nerve, I had a whole bunch of cards up in Canada that I did not retrieve, but I bequeathed them to a dear friend who is also a reader. And because it was cards given to her with absolute love and trust, they were fine with her. But if you just buy this, off a flea market table, you don't know what this has been around. You don't know who's been working it. So, no. Besides, I love a fresh deck, especially I'll pop and go into the Oracle card thing to open it up, to take a look, but then I will fan it out face down and say to the deck, who's going to lead me through the deck? And I'll pull one card, and that is the card that shows me how the deck wants to be used. Because the decks, when I get them, have specific things they want to talk about with me, which I find fascinating. That's why I have 7 or 8 Oracle decks as well as tarot. Ouija boards, however, the way I explain them is using a Ouija board when you don't know how to ground, center, and shield is like throwing open your door in a strange neighborhood and yelling, free beer. You don't know who's out there, but they heard you and they're coming. Yes, Jane Roberts, I believe, started with Seth with a Ouija board. Esther Hicks started with Abraham. But they were seasoned people. I have had to handle 2 hysterical teenagers who just put their hands on the planchette and said, who's there? And suddenly spelled backwards very fast was, I have an axe and I'm here to kill you. It wasn't their Uncle Danny. Okay. And for everybody who says, oh, it's in the toy department, there's nothing wrong with it, because I get this all the time. When I do a lecture, I'll say to the audience, okay, who here has a kid or a grandchild under 10? Hands will go up. You, what's the kid's name? Josh. How old is Josh? 8. Okay. Josh comes to you and goes, Grandma, I got all these on my report card. You said we could go pick out a toy. Let's go. Takes you into the toy department, right over to a box that says, my first chainsaw. It's in the toy department. You're going to let him play with it by himself? No. Have a little sense. Ouija boards, thought forms are thought forms. One of the reasons we have Santa Claus is so many of us have put that energy out there for him. Well, enough people think Ouija boards are the 12th circle of hell that the Ouija board is now obliging. You don't use a Ouija board. You don't touch them. You don't mess with them. They have really bad reps for a good reason.
Yes, and
End of sermon.
yeah. I appreciate that because when I was younger, obviously there's so many movies with, depicting people using Ouija boards. And I remember just
Mhm.
watching it as, as a teenager or maybe even a preteen and just knowing intuitively like that, I don't think that's a wise thing to do. So now that I'm older and I have these conversations and people kind of say the things I was tapping into, I'm like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But
Mm.
also thank you for your opinion in regards to tarot cards, tarot decks as well, and whether or not they are evil or, people might be consulting with darker entities and they don't even realize. I do have a very interesting story for you.
Yes,
So
please.
I went to an expo, I think about 2 years ago. It was a spiritual expo with
Mhm.
different sort of spiritual practitioners, and there were different talks about, different sort of metaphysical things that we experience in this world. But I
Mhm.
went to the expo hall where they had all these different people who had different products that they were selling, and there were lots of psychics around giving readings. And there was this person who was doing a reading with a tarot deck, and they also had a crystal ball. And I
Mhm.
was walking past them. They had someone in front of them. I really was not paying attention to them, but I had this sense or this feeling like I was being watched. And I kid you not, Corby, I turn around and the person, even though they're supposed to be reading for someone else, they're looking at me like this.
Mhm.
It was so I almost till this day kind of gaslight myself like, oh, did I see that? It was just kind of like watching me as I was walking. They were watching me as I was walking past them, but it didn't seem like the person. It kind of felt like it was a masked version of themselves. I don't know how to explain it. It was very, 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 very creepy.
That is why when you go into one of those things, it doesn't hurt to put your shielding up. It really doesn't.
So
That's okay.
how do people shield themselves, protect themselves? Because I think that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, I recommend any of number of the books on psychic protection. Ted Andrews is a good one. But the book that I started with, and I always recommend it as first time, is right here, Opening to Channel, How to Connect with Your Spirit Guide by Sanaya Roman and Dwayne Packer. And the reason I love this is they really do help you protect yourself. It tells you how to protect yourself, gives you the exercises, and also it talks about what is really a spirit guide and what is not, what they do and what they don't. So it keeps you safe when you're first toddling around up there in the kiddie pool. Okay.
So
The way
protection.
I,
Sorry, go
yep,
ahead.
and no, protection is absolutely right. Now, what if you go into a psychic expo and you don't know any of the readers from Adam's House Cat? Well, what you have to do is you have to be a good puppy. What does that mean? Number one, do your walkies. And that is you walk around inside. Just look at people. You don't have to connect with them, nothing. Just see what the energy is like. Then you have to get paper trained. What does that mean? That means that you go and you collect information, rack cards, business cards, whatever, from anybody that looks interesting to you. And you go and you read it and you pick out three or four. When you go back, talk to the psychic if you can. But if we're busy, a lot of us have front people. I told you about staff. My first front person was the wonderful Laura Spickerman, who was my husband's office manager Monday through Friday. Do you think she's going to diss Mrs. Museum Director on the weekend? Probably not. So understand that we can tell you we're wonderful and that doesn't count. And we hire our front people to say they love us. You want to look for our testimonial books. We all have them. In there are comments from people that we've read. Comments like, are we good? Are we accurate? Are we kind? Do we have specialties? Children, dogs, dead people? Did they feel safe? Would they come back? But the last thing is, and this is so important, check on your heart chakra, kids. You are putting your hard-earned money on the table. If the psychic doesn't feel like they have a brain in their head, they really are going to give you good information and they respect who you are. Don't go there no matter how cool the wiki woo looks on the table. And if nobody there rings your chimes, leave without a reading. It just means spirit is saying, nobody here for you this time, honestly.
That's very good advice. And, I was just there to do research and potentially see who could be a guest on the podcast. But I just remember
Mhm.
having that experience and thinking, whoa, that is very odd and very creepy. Okay, so I kind of want to go back a little bit to the tarot readers who do general readings on TikTok and YouTube.
Yep.
And I don't think I fully asked you this question. i- is it possible to do a collective reading, and are those people honest? Because they will come on there and say, well, this is a love reading for all of the Libras, this is a love reading for the collective. If you stumbled upon this, you were supposed to stumble upon this because there's a message for you. And it's, usually it's the same thing they say over and over again in a thousand different ways. What are your
Are you
thoughts
seeing
on
my
that?
face?
Yes.
This is my phone on that. I do make it a practice not to diss a reader I've never had a reading with, but I find those kind of vague readings really annoying. It's one of the reasons why when I do my free reading hours, I try to get people, don't say, pull a card, please. So I can pull a card, I can tell you what I'm getting for you. But when people ask me a question, I like to give them something useful. For instance, if they said, okay, I need to find a new job, what do I need to look for? I would not pull one card, I'd pull three, and I would immediately be able to give the story. Number one, this has to be this has to be a job that you are comfortable doing. It's not going to be 80 hours a week and it's fair money. That's number one. Number two, slow growth but deep roots means you're not going to find it right away. Have faith that you're waiting for the right job, not just one that you can grab. And third, take you about 2 years there to really make your mark and get solid. Now, is there a book somewhere that has those specific meanings for these cards? No, there aren't. But I'm so used to reading them that I see the card and immediately get the download from their person, their guide, if you will, how to present that card to them so that they understand what they need to do. And people come back and say, wow, Corby, it was amazing. You told me there were going to be two jobs and the first one would look good, but not to take it. And you're right, it did. But when I did some looking, it was really a scam. So I avoided that. Thank you very much. Well, that was you being smart, but it was your guide saying, heads up, give her this information so she has something to work with, not a prediction. Big difference.
Right. So basically, what you're saying is that it's just harder to do collective readings because there's so many different energies that you're picking up. So there's, like you said, you're not necessarily here to say that, these readers are not legitimate, but what you're trying to say is that the chances of them actually doing a reading that's I don't want to say accurate, but a reading that is spot on or aligned for people who are watching it is a little
Right.
off because there's too many people. Like, what are you
Now,
really picking up on?
if you want to do a reading for the zeitgeist, like, we're all freaked out about what's happening right now. What do we need to do? Then you can do a general reading because that's a reading for the collective from upstairs. This is how you're going to get through it. It doesn't say that you have to go and hit Chuck Schumer's office and you have to go speak to AOC. That's not what it is. But it may say the only way you're going to get through this is to face with one of the congresspeople. Then they can choose who, what, etc. So that would be reading for the collective. But what they do with the information is totally up to them.
That makes a lot of sense. So, how often do you think people should get tarot readings? Which I know is an interesting question, right? I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do we need tarot readings? And if people decide to get them, how often do you recommend people should do it without getting overly reliant on seeking out someone to read out their current energy or potentially predict their future?
Okay. Do we have to get a facial? No, but it's
No.
really nice. Same thing. How often depends on whether you use the information. If you come and you ask me about that broadcasting studio and I do a reading for you, and you come back in a month and say, great, it was wonderful. Now here's all the different stuff that's happening. Can we look at it again? Baby, sit down. But I have had people that come to me every year with the exact same question, and I know I'm giving them the same information because I remember the cards. And after they do this 3 times, I'm like a good bartender and I cut them off. They're wasting their money and my time
Why do you say that you don't believe in bad news?
because I've done the cancer dance 3 times. Notice I don't say I fought cancer because what you fight fights back. And I'm not a survivor because that is an image of hanging on by teeth and toenails. I call myself a cancer dancer. I found out how graceful I could be under pressure. I avoided getting my toes stepped on and I got off the dance floor in one piece. Now, that gets into your head, does a lot of stuff for you. In my case, I had just been married for 18 months, madly in love. And this was a second primary, but my third time. And the doctor said, well, 3 strikes, you're out. We're taking the rack, we're taking the ovaries, and you're going from this Dolly Parton figure, literally, to a fat fire plug with permanent side effects in 3 weeks. Suck it up. Did I go home and cry? Yeah. But I knew I had to find 3 reasons to be okay with it or I wouldn't get through it. So, number one, you don't have them, you can't get cancer there. Number two, the top half is never going to get slammed in the refrigerator door at the doctor's anymore. And every woman knows exactly what I'm talking about. 3, implants? Cool, I'll be perky till I'm 93. And this is 20 years later. See, so the whole point is, and this is important for what we're all going through right now, there are things that we cannot avoid, but how we work with them determines how they work with us. I always tell people run toward change, not away from it. If you run toward it, you can control it better. If you run away, it's going to trip you. It's behind you. You can't see it. So, looking at right now, we are never going to get America back the way we knew it. but it's time for change. Go in astrology, Pluto return every 248 years. And we are exactly where the United States was at the time of its creation in 1776. Look at all the things that we failed in. So now it's just like the tower card, clear the ground. I'm 70. I may not see the full flowering. The kids will. Gen Zs will. And this is what it is to be a human on planet Earth now. It's one of the reasons that I say I'm an elder, not a boomer. Look, we had the sweet spot, baby. We had the great music and the great cars and the great clothing, and we could go to school and not be afraid of being shot. We could get a job. We could buy a house. The world was not going to choke us to death from climate change. We had that. Today's kids do not. So shut up, boomer. Be an elder. An elder means, number one, get off the stage. Let them shine. Give them information only when they ask you. And be a third trencher. Now, what's that? In World War I, you had three trenches. The first one, people went over the top. Second were the reserves. Third trench was food, medical supplies, the helpers. So when an elder is a third trencher when they're doing a food drive for the homeless, we pack the lunches, we do the dishes. But it's the millennials and Gen Zs that get to plan it, talk to the media, and give it form. And I wish more people my age would understand that, because they need our help in the way that helps them best, not what we tell them. Is that making sense?
It's making a lot of sense. I want to dig a little bit deeper into everything that you said because people have been talking about the fact that we're definitely undergoing a collective, not just within the United States, around the world, a
Mhm.
global ascension, right? So I want to hear your thoughts a little bit more about that, if you received any messages regarding that and what the next couple of years are going to look like, or what is this rip and release or rip and replace supposed to be, if that makes any sense.
Sorry. I have not gotten channeled messages about what this is. I've lived it. Like I think I told you before we started, I saw this happening in 1968 when I was 13. Walking down the street, Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and all of a sudden I got this vision. It's why I chose not to have kids. It's why I think I have always done this work. I knew I would, in some sense, be needed. The world is at a tipping point. And, I look at Star Trek. If we want to get there, we have to rip out the weeds. And in order to rip out the weeds, we have to acknowledge them. America is not, what is it? Home of the free, land of the brave for everybody. It has told itself stories all its life. And yes, John Adams, one of my two favorite presidents, he really did want something wonderful and different for the world. But he wasn't perfect. And in those days, I mean, Abigail, his beloved wife, and they were madly in love, said, don't forget the ladies. But still, voting then was only men with property. For blacks versus whites, blacks were considered two-thirds of a person. What kind of bullshit is that? And now what's happening is non-white, non-Christians are going to outnumber white Christians in the United States within 20, 30 years. And the old men are terrified. And so we've painted them into a corner, and that's why they're fighting as hard as they are. Do I think that this is forever? Are we going to be Gilead? No, we're not, but we have to fight. And we fight for each other, not just for ourselves. So this is not the rapture. This is spirit, in whatever form you see, saying, here's your shot. Gonna take it? And each one of us has to decide, is it our shot? Thank you, Lin-Manuel.
So, in essence, when you talk about us kind of stepping into this opportunity to fight, you're talking about fighting for the global consciousness to ascend into a space where we're more loving, we're more kind, we're more understanding of one
Yes,
another, and build a
yes,
society that reflects that.
yes, exactly. And it's going to take a couple of generations, probably. It's just starting. But we have to. We have to, or mankind's going to be dead in 100 years.
Mm,
And then Mother Earth will heal herself after 1 or 2,000, because if we all kill each other, then all the nuclear plants go and the world has nuclear winter and stuff like that. So, but mom's going to last. She's going to look different, but she'll last.
well, Corby, this has been such an amazing conversation. I always ask my guests at the very end this fun question to wrap up the show, and that's, have you shifted in perspective on anything recently? And it could be as lighthearted as you want it to be or as deep as you would like it to be.
I'm learning how to be an elder without being scared of it. I love being alive. And even though I talk to dead people all the time, I don't want to be one of them. Not for a while. I don't. But with the way the world is, I have to step into my wisdom. I have to step into my elderhood. And, you know, it's a big responsibility, but it's time.
Yeah.
It's time.
Well, thank you so much. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or reach out to you to work with you?
Oh, Jimmy, they can't afford me. My website is corbymitleid.com. I'm on TikTok under the No Bullshit Psychic. I'm on Instagram. I'm on lots of stuff on YouTube, Corby Mitleid. The easiest way is Linktree/Corby Mitleid. That has everything you need.
Thank you so much again for stopping by the show. There's another question that just popped into my head that I feel like
Yes.
I need to ask. And
Mm-hmm.
what advice would you give to anyone who's on a spiritual journey or or just started on a spiritual path and they're a little lost? What advice would you give to them?
You can't get it wrong. You cannot get it wrong. If you're on a spiritual path, the universe has kind of handed you your draft notice and said, hello, you're working for me. Let the universe rifle inside you and see what you've got to work with. I was a theater major at Brown University. I acted in New York. I can do character arcs. Words are my drug of choice. I'm a writer. I can tell the stories, and I've loved history for years. That means my skills are tarot, past lives. I don't do spirit art because I can't draw a stick figure with a sharp pencil and a lot of prayer. Do what you love. And if something else you try just isn't in your wheelhouse, that's okay. You didn't fail. It's just not for you.
Mm. Thank you so much again, Corby, for stopping by the show. This was a great conversation.
It was fun.